Right, let's move on to the final piece of news I would like to talk about in the final bonus clip. And this was once again sent to us via Blizzard_Sloth. So shout out to you, buddy. Thanks for sending that to us. We finally got a bit of confirmation on the Swiss League and their new import regulations here, Chris. So I'm just going to read you through this article, and then I want to get your thoughts on it. So this is what the new foreigner regulation in the National League looks like. This is translated via Google. If the translation's wrong, it's them, not us. So, today, one team can use 4 foreigners in the National League. Yeah, exactly. It will remain so in the coming season. So, for this season and next season, 4 import players. But beyond that, the number of mercenaries, they put it, which I think is a wonderful name to call import players, mercenaries. It is so like Game of Thrones, I love it. The number will be increased. So from the 2022/23 Swiss League season, a maximum of 7 import players can be used per match. The National League decided this past Friday. Licensed Swiss players continue to exist, however, they lose their status after their 22nd birthday. From now on, a foreign license must be obtained from those players. So with this solution, foreign players who have been trained in the Swiss junior leagues for at least 5 years will be given the opportunity to acquire a Swiss passport and thus also qualify for the Swiss national teams, says the letter from the National League. So, by the sounds of it, they're giving all the junior players in the system up until their 22nd birthday, when they're obviously well into their pro careers at that point, to then decide whether they want to become a Swiss national, if they want to keep their place in the Swiss League as a Swiss player, as a domestic player, or whether they want to have a foreign license. So it sounds like players that have come from overseas that have played in the junior system, they can then stay as kind of local players because they're from the junior leagues up until their 22nd birthday. Then they have to make that decision, and they either get a Swiss passport or become a Swiss national and a domestic player, or their name then gets added to the import player list. So by the sounds of it, it's kind of the best of both worlds from the current situation and what was being proposed several weeks ago when we last looked at it. So there's a little bit more I just want to read to you. The regulations for foreigners are part of a league reform that will be finalised at the end of March. Outside the club leaders, a broad front had formed against the increase in the quota of foreigners. So basically there's been a lot of backlash. Up to 10 foreigners per team had been discussed, but obviously they've brought that back to 7 now. The league also decided at its board of directors meeting that the current championship would in any case be ended before the World Cup. So their current season's going to end before the World Championships by the sounds of it. I would imagine so. The plan is that the regular season will end on April 5th and that the pre-playoff will take place immediately afterwards and the playoffs on April 13th. The World Cup, which will be held in Riga, begins on May 21st according to this. But obviously in our previous bonus clip earlier this week, there's been a bit of a discussion about that and the schedule is still to change. So to summarise, and so Chris, you can give us your thoughts in a lovely, concise way. The initial speculation or the initial idea to have 10 import players from the 22/23 Swiss League season has now been reduced to 7, and now any players that come up through the junior system now have until their 22nd birthday to decide whether they want to become Swiss nationals. So you can have players under 22 that have played through the junior system that still count as players, domestic players, as opposed to import players. That pretty much makes sense to me. I hope that makes sense to everybody listening. Chris, give me your thoughts.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think by the time that a player gets to 22, they and the people around them will probably have quite a good idea as to whether they will be kind of good enough to be picked up by another league.
Yeah.
In which case they don't need to worry about becoming a Swiss national, or whether kind of the Swiss league is kind of what they're going to get and it would be beneficial to them to get the citizenship and then not count towards the import limit. So it kind of makes sense to me. Now, you can have 7 imports. There is nothing then to stop the team, apart from the fact that if you feel you're team full of youngsters, you may not win much. You can still, but to have like 7 imports and then a load of not Swiss players, but the juniors from the Swiss national system. So you could have a team with no Swiss people in it at all.
That's very true.
I doubt that's going to happen.
No.
I think, you've got to mix the old and the new in any hockey team. So to me, certainly on the face of it, it looks as though it makes sense. And it gives the teams the opportunity to be able to develop the young players who aren't necessarily Swiss without getting penalised against the import limit So to me, it makes sense. We'll wait, obviously, and see what couples with this new format of the Swiss national system that they're going on about doing.
Yes.
And whether there's any changes lower down to what the junior system can look like or can do.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly on the face of this announcement, it looks as though it kind of makes sense. And I think, as I said at the start, by the time you get to 22, you've got a pretty good idea of what your level is and what might be open to you.
Absolutely. So obviously, there are some late bloomers, but they're very rare compared to the general trajectory of most players. And I think I'm kind of trying to piggyback on the point you're trying to make. I think, Chris, it's more so like at that point. Before then, you're giving these prospects and these junior players the chance to develop in the best situation possible. Find a team that really works for them, and there's no fear of those teams having these players snapped up by another team because they have an extra space on the import cap. Now, obviously, we're going to have to wait for some of our... We do have several people that are close to the Swiss League that might have their own opinions on this, and do let us know in the comments below on this video. We do want to hear what you guys have to say, because I will preface this by saying, Chris and I, we're not experts of the Swiss League. We're very much learning a lot as we go along. And you guys that have, like Blizzard_Sloth and a couple of other guys, have been helping to keep us up to date with what's actually going on in the Swiss League circuit. That's how we actually knew that there was all these changes coming. So, but I feel like it's very important to mention that obviously they were thinking 10 imports to begin with, and obviously there was a huge amount of backlash to that by the sounds of it within the Swiss hockey circles. So they've reduced it by 3 or so, which is good. I feel like reducing it from 10 to 7, it still gives enough room where, like you mentioned, Chris, the junior players have the chance to develop, they have the chance to kind of refine their game and get that ice time that they've been getting over the last few years. But it also means that teams can also bring in some ex-NHL players or players from the KHL, or these guys that have been some of the best players in the world for part of their career. So it gives a nice balance of not just young and old, but also super experienced, highly talented players to bring the overall level of the league up, and giving the chance for younger junior players and the next generation to get that ice time and develop into those next star players. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the other way to look at it, of course, is by reducing the number of imports by 3, you've got an extra forward line of homegrown talent.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the other way of looking at it. Yeah, I think it's one of the things, import levels, there's always a balance and everybody's always unhappy. And yes. I think if you look at like the import levels around Europe, and then you look at like the import levels in the Elite League, which are just through the roof. I mean, they've reduced it to 13?
Something like 13, that, yeah.
And but I think the Swiss League, I think it will take some bedding in, but I think on the face of it anyway, it seems as though it's a good move and should hopefully help with the Swiss youngsters, and they can see a clearer path up now because there's more opportunity for them because the import limit is lower.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's going to be hopefully the Swiss fans who listen to the podcast will agree with us to an extent. They might have their own opinions and think, actually, we could reduce it by a couple more given the structure. Maybe that's the case they go with, because it's 3 at the moment. 4, sorry. So it's 4 at the moment. Maybe they're thinking actually 5 or 6 would be a smarter idea here, but the whole up until 22, that's a good idea moving forwards. Obviously, like I said, we're not well versed. We're not the best versed in terms of the Swiss League, but hopefully this is more of a compromise for both sides of the argument. It works for the bigger clubs that have the bigger budgets that can sign those guys, and it works for the smaller, less competitive clubs that have the weaker budgets that do really rely on having these junior players come up through the system and kind of lead their team to regular season success. So hopefully it works for everyone. We'll keep you updated if Blizzard_Sloth gives us more information, or if we find more information as we go along. And hopefully the Swiss League keeps being one of the best leagues in Europe. It'd be very nice to see.